Iran trembles. C-17 Globemasters deploy 20,000 troops to Persian Gulf. Tehran's defense is crumbling after Iran launched coordinated missile strikes against multiple American interests across the Middle East. The Pentagon issued an immediate mobilization order. Within hours, military installations across the continental United States transitioned to full combat readiness. The directive was clear: deploy 20,000 combat troops to forward operating bases in the Persian Gulf region within 72 hours. At Joint Base Lewis-McChord in Washington state, soldiers from the 2nd Infantry Division began assembling in company formations outside their barracks. Transport trucks pulled up in long convoys. Duffel bags packed with uniforms, body armor, ammunition pouches, night vision equipment, and personal essentials were loaded onto flatbed trailers. Soldiers climbed aboard the trucks with their individual weapons secured in soft cases. The convoy moved toward the flight line, where a row of C-17 Globemaster III heavy transport aircraft sat waiting with engines already running. The C-17S had been pre-positioned the night before. Ground crews spent the early morning hours conducting pre-flight inspections, testing hydraulic systems, checking turbofan engines, and verifying cargo loading mechanisms. By the time the first transport trucks arrived, every aircraft on that ramp was cleared for immediate departure. The loading process began without delay. Soldiers filed up the rear ramps and took their seats along the cargo bay walls. Load masters directed personnel to specific positions, ensuring weight distribution met flight parameters. Pallets of additional equipment were rolled aboard on motorized carts. Communications, gear, medical supplies, portable generators, water purification units, ammunition crates, everything was strapped down and secured with cargo netting. At Fort Bragg in North Carolina, paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division were going through their own departure sequence. These soldiers would not be landing at a conventional airfield. They were rigged for airborne insertion. Main parachutes secured to their backs, reserve chutes strapped across their chests. Rucksacks weighing over 70 pounds hung from their harnesses. Weapons were carried in padded rifle cases. The paratroopers formed two columns and marched toward their assigned C-17s. They moved with precision, each man knowing exactly where to position himself inside the aircraft. The jump masters conducted final equipment checks, inspecting static lines, verifying parachute rigging. Once the checks were complete, the rear ramps closed and the aircraft taxied to the runway. Across the country at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, a different kind of preparation was underway. A B-52H Stratofortress strategic bomber sat on the apron surrounded by weapons, loading crews. This aircraft had a singular mission: penetrate Iranian airspace and destroy hardened underground missile production facilities buried deep beneath the mountains. The ordnance being loaded onto the B-52 was massive. AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles, each one weighing over 2,000 pounds, were mounted onto the external wing pylons using hydraulic hoists. Inside the internal rotary launcher within the bomb bay, technicians loaded GBU-31 joint direct attack munitions, 2,000-pound guided bombs equipped with GPS guidance kits capable of striking within 3 meters of their designated target coordinates. Each weapon underwent a complete systems check before being locked into position. Electrical connections were verified. Arming mechanisms were tested. Safety pins with red streamers were inserted and would remain in place until the aircraft was airborne and approaching the target area. In the crew facility, the 6-member B-52 crew conducted their pre-flight briefing. The aircraft commander reviewed the flight plan, a route that would take them across the Atlantic through European airspace, into the eastern Mediterranean, and finally over Iraqi airspace before releasing their weapons against targets inside Iran. Total flight time, 14 hours. The crew gathered their equipment. Oxygen masks were tested and regulators checked. The crew walked out to the aircraft and climbed aboard through the forward entry hatch. The B-52's 8 Pratt and Whitney turbofan engines ignited one by one, each producing a distinctive high-pitched whine as the turbines spun up to operating speed. The bomber taxied slowly toward the runway. At the runway threshold, the pilots advanced the throttles to full power. The aircraft accelerated gradually, using nearly the entire length of the concrete before rotating and lifting off. The landing gear retracted, and the B-52 climbed steadily, turning east toward its first aerial refueling point. Meanwhile, the first wave of C-17s carrying soldiers from the 2nd Infantry Division had already crossed into European airspace. These aircraft made brief stops at Ramstein Air Base in Germany to take on additional fuel and pick up pre-positioned equipment pallets before continuing their flight to the Middle East. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, ground crews had been working nonstop to prepare for the incoming fleet. Parking spots were cleared. Refueling trucks were staged. When the first C-17 appeared on approach, everything was ready. The moment the aircraft touched down and taxied to its assigned spot, the unloading sequence began. The rear ramp dropped. Soldiers filed out and formed up on the tarmac. Forklifts moved in to extract cargo pallets. Vehicles were unchained and driven off. The entire process took less than 30 minutes. That same C-17 would refuel and fly back to the United States to pick up another contingent of troops. The soldiers who had just arrived were directed to their temporary billeting areas. Large tent structures had been erected to house the incoming personnel. Each soldier dropped their gear, secured their weapons, and received their operational briefing. Across the base, attack helicopters were being prepared for immediate deployment. A -64D Apache longbow gunship sat in revetments with maintenance crews, performing final checks. The Apaches would be the primary air-to-ground strike platform operating over the Strait of Hormuz, tasked with destroying Iranian fast attack boats and neutralizing coastal anti-ship missile batteries. Each Apache underwent a complete weapons load. 19-round Hydra 70 rocket pods were mounted on the stub-wing pylons. The M230 chain gun beneath the nose was loaded with 1,200 rounds of 30 millimeters high explosive ammunition. AGM-114 Hellfire missiles were mounted onto wing-mounted launch rails. 4 Hellfires per aircraft. Fuel trucks pulled alongside each helicopter. Single-point refueling adapters were connected, and JP-8 aviation kerosene pumped into the internal tanks. Once complete, the connection was disconnected and the fuel cap sealed. Pilots arrived at the flight line and conducted their own pre-flight walk. Arounds, they checked the main rotor head, inspected the tail rotor assembly, verified that all access panels were secured. Inside the cockpit, they powered up the avionics systems. The twin General electric T-700 turboshaft engines ignited with a rising whine, and the 4-bladed main rotor began turning. At a naval base on the coast, amphibious operations were underway. The USS Tripoli, a America-class amphibious assault ship, sat pier. Side-taking on Marines from the 13th of March in Expeditionary Unit, the Marines carried full combat loads and boarded the ship. Once aboard, they were directed to their berthing compartments below deck. On the flight deck, CH-53E Super Stallion heavy-lift helicopters were being prepared. These aircraft would transport Marines from the ship to forward landing zones along the Iranian coast once the order was given. Ground crews unfolded the rotor blades and locked them into flight position. Below deck in the well deck, landing craft air cushion hovercraft were being loaded with light armored vehicles and supplies. Back at the airbase in Qatar, the 82nd Airborne paratroopers, who had jumped into their designated drop zone hours earlier, were now linked up with their heavy equipment. Humvees equipped with mounted machine guns, all-terrain vehicles for reconnaissance, portable command posts with satellite communication systems. The paratroopers established a perimeter defense around their assembly area. Fighting positions were dug. M240 machine guns and M2 Browning .5 O-caliber heavy machine guns were emplaced at key defensive points. Observation posts were established with soldiers equipped with thermal imaging devices maintaining constant surveillance. As night fell, additional C-17 flights continued arriving. More soldiers, more equipment. The buildup was relentless. Every 6 hours, another wave of aircraft touched down, offloaded, and departed for the return trip. 20,000 troops, hundreds of armored vehicles, attack helicopters, strategic bombers, amphibious assault ships, all converging on the Persian Gulf region within 72 hours. The message to Tehran was unmistakable. The United States military had arrived in overwhelming force, and Iran's window for any effective response was rapidly closing.